The title of today's talk is Cause and Effect, Here and Now. Whenever we talk about the law of cause and effect, people would jump to the conclusion that we are talking about the law of karma. Today I'm going to tell you that there are various laws of cause and effect, and I have categorized them into three classes. There's one class that is empirical, quantifiable, verifiable, and intellect-based. The second type is not empirical, not quantifiable, not verifiable, and faith-based. And the third type is empirical, sometimes quantifiable, and it's verifiable and experience-based. There are always exceptions to the rule, which is supposed to be empirical, quantifiable, verifiable, and intellect-based. Refers to the realm of science. The whole philosophy of science is based on the motivation to understand the principles of nature so that one can live in harmony with it. That was the initial lofty aim of science. But now, its aim has changed a bit. Now we are trying to understand the principles of nature in order to control it at our own expense, not realizing that we are also part of nature and that we should actually try to live in harmony with nature rather than try to control it. Long ago, even before the apple dropped on Isaac Newton's head, the law of gravity is already there, right? He just discovered it. Since the 18th century until now, in the span of a few hundred years, scientists have made great advances in technology. I remember when I was still a layman, that was back in the late 70s, before I became a monk and before I left for Burma. The thing that was in vogue at that time was cassette tapes and gramophone records. Have any of you here seen gramophone records? Maybe senior citizens, but not the youngsters. For those who are young, you might not know what a gramophone record is. It's something like a CD, just that is about 2-3 times larger than it, and 5-6 times thicker than it, and is black in color. So when I became a monk back in the late 70s, that was the last thing I saw, gramophones. After I became a monk, I went to stay in Burma, in the forest, for many years. Almost 10 years in Burma, and then when I came back to Malaysia, I went straight to Sarawak and stayed in the forest again for another 3-4 years. When I was still in university in 1978, I was doing a course in housing, building and planning, majoring in architecture. There is this CAD, Computer Aided Design, and in those days there was no AutoCAD. There was just a mainframe. And it's not a PC, it's not a personal computer. So what you need to do is come up with your own formula for the computer, key in all the codes to the computer in cards with holes in it. Young people wouldn't know what it's all about. If you make a little mistake, a wrong command in one word or one letter, all the cards come back to you. So I have a whole stack of cards. I never did very well in a computer. When I came back in 1994, I went to Sarawak and someone built me a kuti in the forest. We could say it's a forest because it was originally a rubber plantation and it was disused for 20 years, so it's now overgrown, secondary forest. But anyway, a manufacturer built me a little hut, a kuti up there. And in that part of the world, they haven't seen the monk before. The natives, nor the Chinese there, most of them were Christians or were animists. So they employed somebody at the foothill to cook for me, and I would go down to collect my alms. It was too far away from the city for people to send me food, so they had to employ a cook down at the foothill, and I would walk down to collect my food. Now one day as I went to collect my food, I saw a yellow contraption, a small portable thing, looks pretty. And I looked at it, it was at the table where they served me, and I was wondering what it is, never seen it before. And guess what it was? Yeah, it's a Sony Walkman. I've been walking in the forest for so many years, I've never seen a Sony Walkman before. So I asked my cook, what on earth is that? He said that's a CD player. A CD? What on earth is a CD? I've never seen it before. So he opened up the contraption and showed me a CD, and it's a small, thin little thing, and it's shining. And I thought, oh, is that a gramophone? It's no, that's been phased out a long time ago. I said, how does it work? For gramophones, you have a needle, right? That sits on the gramophone as it rotates. But you don't see any needles here. That's how technology has changed so far. And by that time, PC was already available. It's so user-friendly. Don't have to go through all the hassle of typing in your own codes to the mainframe. I spent many years in the forest, following the footsteps of my teacher, who is a pretty extraordinary monk, because he was ordained in the forest tradition, and yet he was a scholar. He had studied the whole of the Tipitaka with its commentaries and all the sub-commentaries in Pali. Plus, he was also a very conscientious monk, very strict in the Vinaya, and practices the Dhutanga as well. Very rare gem indeed. Very strange that I had to go all the way to the US to meet up with Sarau Jotika. I'm sure you've heard of him. Snow in Summer, so also a very famous Burmese monk. Met him in 1984 in Barre, Massachusetts, and I was looking for a teacher like that. So I told him I'm in search of a teacher, a scholar, who stays in the forest, practicing the Dhutangas, the ascetic practices, and who also practices meditation. And he said, yeah, that's my teacher. Very strange. And he gave me the address, and after I came back, I went straight to his monastery. I found out that while he was studying the Tipitaka for the second or the third time, he had compiled an index of some of the interesting points that he noticed in the course of his study. But it was not very systematic. He just wrote it down on an exercise book. I was a bit more advanced. So I thought, okay, why not we arrange it in Burmese alphabetical order, so easier to find. So I got some of the monks, his disciple monks there, to rewrite everything from the notebook, not our notebook these days, not a laptop notebook, it's a real paper exercise book. And transfer it into sheets of paper, and then we arrange it in alphabetical order, and then after that we transfer that again into a proper paper notebook. And then I was very inspired by what he had done, and he had also lived as a hermit in a forest monastery for many years before he started to take students. He was actually a lecturer in a monastic Pali college before, but he got fed up of teaching, and he decided to go to the forest. He went into the forest, stayed all alone, and then started a library, a Tipitaka library. So all the books were there. And he had left that place because his mother built him a forest monastery somewhere else and invited him to go stay there. So now that place was vacant. Since it was vacant and I wanted to follow his footsteps, after staying with him for about a year and a half, I left to be on my own, be a hermit like him, and also to read through the Tipitaka and to compile an index. So at that time, I was a bit smarter. I compiled my index using index cards. In those days, we have index cards, so I don't have to write it twice. I just write it once, and then after that, I just arrange it in Pali alphabetical order. It took me a couple of years, I think I spent about 7 years in the forest there, and it took me the whole time to compile this index of what I've read as I was going through the Tipitaka. So I got an index box specially made. When I came back to Malaysia in 1994, I managed to get that box back, an antique with all my index cards. And then I was in Sarawak until 1998. Came out, and then somebody told me that Goenkaji had started a foundation called Vipassana Research Institute, and they had come out with a CD of the whole Tipitaka, plus all the commentaries and sub-commentaries and additional texts, and all in one CD. All my years of work became obsolete. All my index cards, all my years of labor is now still in the antique in my monastery in SPS. Now I don't use it anymore. I use the search engine in the PC. Much easier. But that's how far technology has gone. And even higher, even more. Many years ago, even before I became a monk, they have already sent people up to the moon. Yeah, and they are sending spaceships to other solar systems, other planets. They have made so sophisticated equipment, so precise, all because they have uncovered or discovered the laws of cause and effect. And these are the physical laws of cause and effect. It is extended not only to just technology in that sense, but also to medical science, advancement in science and technology and in medical science. Has the world become a better place to live in terms of safety, security, peace and harmony? What do you think? Have people become less greedy, less angry, less depressed, and less deluded? I just read a report that was done in 1995, that's a long time ago. It says that at that time when the report was compiled, depression had become a number 5 leading sickness or disease in the world. And by 2014, it's expected to be number 2. Despite all these conveniences that we have nowadays because of science and technology, there seems to be more suffering. People are suffering from depression, from stress, and many, many other psychological debilitation. Very debilitating diseases which are psychosomatic in nature, coming from the mind, stemming from the mind. But that's also the law of cause and effect. And I said earlier that this is something which is empirical because it's science. Science needs all this evidence, and you have to conduct experiments in the laboratory to verify whatever theory or hypothesis that you have. And it's quantifiable, and precisely because they can quantify their findings, that they can make precision instruments, precision equipment. Nowadays, a handphone can do wonders. Look at the cartoons in the comics. Have you heard of Dick Tracy before? Who could communicate through audio-visual communication by looking at his watch. I think nowadays that's already available. And nowadays the handphone has got even more memory than a PC 5 years ago. Everything is fantastic. It may be empirical, it may be quantifiable, it's verifiable, and intellect-based for the scientists, but not for the ordinary people, right? For most of us, science has become a religion, isn't it? Can you really verify all these findings that are published in the newspapers, in the magazines and all that? How do you know what the advertisement says on your prescription drug is really true? You can't. You just accept it out of faith, isn't it? As you know, the pharmaceutical industry is very strong and they finance a lot of medical researchers. And one wonders whether the findings are actually impartial and accurate or not. Holistic medical practitioners and naturopaths have a lot to say against allopathic medicine, mainstream medicine. Those people who are in the know about scientific findings will be able to tell you that there are lots of new findings, so-called new. They have been found 20, 30 years ago, but have not been released to the general public, because if done so, it might jeopardize the pharmaceutical industry, and mainstream medical practitioners. Even if you don't believe in mainstream medical science, if you believe in herbal medicine, in traditional Chinese medicine, or in Ayurveda, or in homeopathy, still it's also based on faith, isn't it? Because you don't have the facts and figures to really know what is happening. It's all based on faith. So there are a lot of things that we don't know. And many of the secret technological discoveries that were already being used 20, 30 years ago by the Secret Service and the FBI and the CIA in the US are only beginning to be released now to the general public because they have found something better than that. So that's outfaced. So that's what you get. But still, it's very advanced. But what's the point of understanding all these laws of cause and effect when they cannot actually help us to reduce our greed, hatred, and delusion, to give us more peace and harmony, more security on this earth? In fact, many of these discoveries have been misused in the creation of nuclear weapons, other weapons of war that, instead of helping mankind, are disseminating mankind and causing so much hatred and disharmony in this world. Well, so much for the first type of law of cause and effect. The second type of law of cause and effect, as I said, is something which is not empirical, not quantifiable, not verifiable, but it's faith-based. And that is none other than the law of karma. A lot of Buddhists claim that Buddhism does not entertain blind faith. Do you agree? Do you believe in karma? Can you prove to me empirically and quantifiably that the law of karma exists? Do you believe in rebirth? Yes. Can you prove to me that you existed in a previous birth, or that you will be reborn again? Impossible. For the majority of us, the moral law of karma is only a belief, is only a faith. How different is it from believing that Jesus will save you? How different is it from believing that Allah will be your savior? It is also another article of faith. In fact, the Buddha said specifically, categorically, in the Anguttara Nikaya, that the result of karma is something which is not to be speculated upon. If you try to do so, you will end up being deranged. The four things that you're not supposed to speculate on. One is the Buddha Visaya, the range of a Buddha, what a Buddha can do. The second is the Jhana Visaya, the range of jhana. Although nowadays there's a lot of controversy about what jhana really is. If you really follow the Buddha's advice, you shouldn't even try to speculate about that, because you'll be deranged. And then the third is the result of karma. That is also not something to be speculated. And finally, there is the speculation about the origin of this world. That is also not something to be fathomed by our human consciousness. So even the scientists may postulate certain theories about the Big Bang and how the universe may contract instead of explode and so forth. These are all just theories, and no way that you can actually prove it. Although we as Buddhists and Hindus as well, you could say, believe in the law of karma, it is something that we cannot verify by ourselves. It's not something that is quantifiable. You don't know how much good karma or bad karma you had done before in the past, and when the good or the bad karma will give results. You may be the best accountant in the world, but you cannot keep the books for your karma. And you never know when the good and the bad karma will ripen. Yeah? And karma is not so straightforward, it's not so black and white. The Buddha also talked about dark and white karma, which is actually a mixture. It's not so clear-cut that it's dark or it's bright. It's dark and bright at the same time. When you mix black coffee and milk, what do you get? Something brown, right? It's neither dark nor bright. It's somewhere in between. believing in that law of karma also has its uses. Although it's just a belief, it's a faith, one should be cautious about that. Since it's only a belief, since it's only a faith. If you are a very staunch Theravada Buddhist, you would perhaps ridicule or laugh at the Pure Land Buddhists who claim that there is a Sukhawati paradise somewhere where Amitabha Buddha is waiting for you. Right? I mean, Theravada Buddhists would say that this is all hocus pocus, because if you study the historical development and evolution of Buddhism, you would know that this concept or this idea of the Pure Land School came about over 1,000 years after the Buddha passed away. But still, there are testimonies. So many testimonies of people who have experienced seeing Amitabha, particularly for people who are at their deathbeds, and people who have invoked the help of Kuan Yin and have seen Kuan Yin coming to save them in various ways. And these are all based on faith, and it has results. You believe in the law of karma, but how do you know for sure that it actually exists? Although we have scientific case studies, Dr. Ian Stevenson, a very famous parapsychologist based in the University of Virginia in the US, dedicated almost the whole of his adult life researching on this. And yet, being a scientist, the title of his book is 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. He just used the word suggestive. Although these were all based on reports given by children who could spontaneously recall their past life, their previous human life. And they gave very, very convincing evidence, because when they remembered their past life, they were elsewhere. And when they finally got to the place where they formerly lived, they were able to identify objects that belonged to them as well as the names of relatives. So it's all very convincing. But very interestingly, one of his assistants is a Buddhist by the name of Francis Torrey, an Englishman, a staunch Theravadan Buddhist. He helped him when he was in Sri Lanka as a field assistant to collect all this evidence and to interview the children who could spontaneously recall their past lives. And when he compared what happened to them before in their past life and what they are right now, the birthmarks and so forth, he was very amazed, because he found that he could not make any connections between the karma that they did in the past and what they are experiencing now. They could have been murdered in the past. They were murdered by being shot, and then you could see there is a hole in the heart. That scar reappeared in the new personality. Now, when you look at the law of karma, it shouldn't happen that way, isn't it? It's the person who shot him that should have it, not him. Okay? And then there are other instances where the person who died was a cattle rustler and he was killed. And then he came back again as a human being. He could remember his past life and things like that. So if you are a cattle rustler, you are a person who steals and robs, you should be going down to hell, isn't it? Not coming back as a human being. So there are many instances of this, and he cannot reconcile. He says the law of karma is really very complicated, because it's not just a simple relationship. We have done so much karma before, wholesome karma, unwholesome karma, and since we believe in past lives, we believe in samsara, and samsara has an inconceivable beginning. So how much good and bad karma we have done before, and when they will ripen. But as I said, believing in the law of karma also has its good points. For instance, because you believe in the law of karma, you're afraid that if you do wrong, next time you'll have to reap the bad results. So you try to refrain from doing bad things, and you try to do good things, hoping that you will get rewards in the future. It's like the carrot and the stick mentality. That's what drives people, isn't it? If you've been to Sasnaraka Buddhist Sanctuary in Taiping, where I stay, it's up on a hill, and the road going up there is pretty sharp and winding. I noticed that our drivers, who are very used to driving up and down the slope, they would very guai fasten their safety belt when they go down to town. But once they come into the private road, they will just slip off their safety belts and drive up the road. Now look at that. What are they afraid of? And they're afraid of the police. They're not afraid of dying, in an accident, going up that dangerous slope. The safety belts are prescribed for your own safety. Not because the police want to find you and you're afraid of that. But the mentality of people is like that. They thrive on this carrot and stick mentality. So in a way it's good. It keeps you in line, right? Well, another way that it can help you is like when you get into a nasty accident. A great misfortune befalls upon you. Maybe your spouse suddenly dies. Or you are suddenly diagnosed as having terminal cancer at the age of 40 with only 2 more years to live or 2 more months to live. And a normal person would be devastated, would be shocked, don't know what to do. Normally people would say, why me? I've tried to observe the precepts so well, do dana, I even go to Sasana Buddhist Sanctuary and do katina. Why should this happen to me? Denial. That's one of the first things that will happen to a person when he or she is told of this diagnosis. Then later on, people learn to accept it. And finally, when you can't solve problems, what do we say? Karma la. What to do? It's like karma la. At least you got something to fall back on, If you are a non-believer, who are you going to blame? No one else to blame. And if you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim, you still have someone to fall back on, isn't it? Allah. It's God's grace. Maybe God has something better for me. Enough of this lousy world. Maybe He's got a better place for me up there. He's got better plans for me. All these are all based on faith, good faith, and speculation. But it's helpful. Yeah, it helps to give you consolation at times of need. But there's always pros and cons, right? One of my devotees used to have a son working in Pakistan. He's a sort of a supervisor in charge of the workers in a resort. And the workers are all Muslims, right? Pakistanis. He would try to be very punctual, to do things correctly and impeccably. And you will find that these workers are not punctual, they're very laid back. Sometimes they sleep beyond their lunchtime. Sometimes they loiter around and do nothing. And then when he threatens them or scolds them, they will say, well, not my fault. Allah asked me to sleep longer, If you sack me, there's Allah's choice. What can I do? So that's also another drawback of having this sort of belief. Yeah, we become fatalistic. So we need to strike a balance between one and the other. The third type of law of cause and effect, which is the title of today's talk, cause and effect here and now, is something which is empirical, although not quantifiable. It is verifiable, and it is not faith-based but experience-based. Something that you can experience for yourself. You don't have to rely on an external source, although initially there might be a little bit of intellectual understanding to get to know the theory of how this happens or how this can be experienced. And although for most of us it's non-quantifiable, nowadays neuroscientists and people who are engaged in mind science seem to be coming out with various ways of measuring the effects of mindfulness or effects of meditation on the human brain or the human system. And this mind-matter law of cause and effect is both rational and non-rational. Rational in the sense that when you observe, you can make extrapolations and you can come out with some conclusions. It's not rational in the sense that it can be intuitive. As you practice more and more mindfulness, then you'll be able to intuit into causes and conditions that are responsible for what's happening to you right now. So today's talk would mostly be stressing on this cause and effect here and now, the mind-matter law of cause and effect, which is something that need not have to rely on blind faith, something that you can actually experience for yourself in the here and now. This is one of the things about Buddhism that has impressed many people in the West, people of all faiths. It is the practice of mindfulness. If you know, Goenkaji is a very famous Vipassana meditation teacher who was trained in Burma, but who has, through the years, presented Vipassana meditation as something non-religious. So that now he has many assistant teachers who come from different faiths. They are not necessarily Buddhists. And if you go to any Goenka retreat, you will see that there are no Buddha images. It's just a matter of meditating to watch the physical sensations in your body, trying to apply mindfulness to observe what's happening to your physical sensations. And this method of meditation has benefited many people. I wonder if any of you have seen the movie or the docu, Doing Time, Doing Vipassana. Any of you have seen it? You haven't? Well, Doing Time, Doing Vipassana is one of the earlier videos that was done by the Goenka group of people. It was about his success in introducing mindfulness practice or Vipassana practice to the prisons in India, to one of the most notorious prisons in India. And you can imagine there's about 1,000 yogis, prisoners, who were doing Vipassana at that time. One of the interesting things about this experiment is that the prison wardens say that before the prisoners were introduced to Vipassana meditation, they were always in self-denial. They were always denying that they had done anything wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. It's society that has incarcerated them. But after their meditation, then they begin to really see their own faults. And after the 10-day retreat, it's very touching to see all these prisoners hugging their wardens in tears because they already know that they were in the wrong. How could that come about? That's because they developed concentration. And the Buddha said, develop concentration, monks. For one who is concentrated, for one who has concentration, sees things according to reality. Right? So when your mind is concentrated and you're watching all those thoughts and memories that pop up in your mind, you cannot fool yourself. You will see all those things very clearly, that you were in the wrong. You did all those unwholesome things. To understand this mind-matter law of cause and effect, you need very simple apparatus. Your lab is just your own mind and your body. And your apparatus is just mindfulness and full awareness. Very simple only. Nothing more than that. It's so simple that it's very difficult to do. The principle is very simple, but it's far more difficult to remember to do it. First of all, before we can start to investigate and observe cause and effect here and now, we have to know a little bit about the nature of the mind. Number one, the mind is a phenomena that has the ability to know. It can be aware of something, it knows something. But I cannot stop there. If I just say that the mind has the ability to know and be aware of something, you could ask whether your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue and your body are also the mind, because they also can see, hear, smell, taste and sense. Right? In Buddhism, we talk about the six senses. The eye is one sense, and the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, 5 senses. Our sixth sense is the mind, which is quite different from the usual English meaning of sixth sense, which is extrasensory perception. For us, Buddhists, the sixth sense is not extra, it's all part of us. So we already have the sixth sense. What is the difference between the 5 senses and the sixth sense? Well, the 5 senses are very limited in their capacity to know. They are very specialized. The eye can only see, cannot hear, cannot smell, cannot taste, right? Cannot sense physical sensations. Although you might question, how come sometimes I have eye ache? Then how come the eye is aching? Well, it's not the eye that's aching, it's the body that's aching, because your eye comprises body as well, body consciousness. In the whole eyeball, it's only one part of the eyeball that is sensitive to light. sensitive to colors. The rest of it is sensitive to physical sensations. So although physically we call it the eye or the eyeball, the sensitive part of the eye that can receive light and colors is only the retina, or to be more specific, the rods and the cones. And the ear can only hear vibrations. It cannot see, it cannot smell, cannot taste, cannot sense sensations, and so forth. Same for the other senses. Another feature of these 5 senses is that they can only take objects in the present moment. You can only smell whatever that you can smell right now. What you smelled yesterday, if it's not here in this room or in front of you, you wouldn't be able to smell it. Same for what you can see and hear or taste or feel with your body. Now, the special thing about the mind is that the object of the mind can be more than just present objects, more than just objects in the here and now. Whereas you can only see something which is right in front of you here, your mind can see something which you saw yesterday, right? Yeah, in your mind's eye, can you think of something that you saw yesterday, although it's not in front of you? Yeah, you can. The mind can see. It's even more obvious when you are having a dream at night. When you're dreaming at night, all your 5 senses are shut down. You're not even aware that you're in your room or you're sleeping on your bed. But in your mind, you may be running for your life, pursued by robbers. Or you may be having a nice time in the disco, dancing with your spouse or with your partner, hearing all the music and feeling all the touch and everything. So another feature of the mind is that it can take objects of the past, future, and fantasies, imagination. When I say take objects of the future, I refer to people who have premonitions, clairvoyance. They can actually see what's going to happen in the future, or they can sense with their mind. So that is what the mind can do. The mind can do things which are really beyond what you can think right now. Well, another thing that the mind can do is that it can think and conceive. Your 5 senses cannot think or cannot conceive. Your eye can only see colors. Your ear can only listen to vibrations, sounds. It is the mind that interprets what is received at the 5 sense doors. Now it's very obvious with sound. Anyone here can speak Thai or Burmese? No. Ahang dani Bali Basaya Lapami Eta Ko Atang Janati. Can you understand? This is neither Thai nor Burmese, it's Pali. Okay? What you hear when I say those things, you only hear vibrations, right? And you cannot decipher or cannot make out what I'm trying to say. It's just vibrations. And probably what is going on in your mind is, what is Bhante trying to say? Yeah? So it is the mind that is doing the thinking. The 5 senses can only receive bare data, very much like the ones and zeros that you key into your computer. If you don't have a software that can interpret this raw data, then you wouldn't be able to do anything to it. So our software is our mind. And our minds are actually programmed. They have been pre-programmed to react in a certain way. And where does programming come from? It's due to causes and conditions. In fact, every thought, every view, every opinion that arises in your mind is a product of past conditioning and present circumstances. Notice that I say past conditioning and present circumstances. If I just say past conditioning, then it will be fatalistic. Right? Present circumstances must also be there, so that just as we are heirs of the past, we are also creators of our future destiny, to some extent. There are some things that we can change and some things that we cannot change. Right? There are some conditioning that are so strong that it's impossible for us to change. For example, your body build, your face, your hair, or your skin complexion. Although there are exceptions to the rule. Michael Jackson can turn from black to white. That's applying the laws of science. But although he could physically change, like a chameleon, from black to white, did that bring him happiness? So, coming back to understanding cause and effect here and now. To sum up, the mind is something that can know, can think, can conceive, can imagine. Right? The other 5 senses can only be aware of specific objects in the here and now. Whereas the mind can be aware of these 5 objects as well as objects of the past, of the future, fantasies and imagination, concepts. Another feature of the mind that you need to understand is that it must always have an object, normally speaking. The mind without an object in the normal sense is no mind. When the mind arises, it must have an object for it to arise. They are mutually dependent. So these are the 2 things that you need to understand. In order to keep track of the mind, we have to give it a reference point. If you don't give a reference point for the mind, then you'll be lost in thoughts without your even knowing it. You must have an anchor. To give you a simile, it's like a monkey. If you try to study the behavior of a monkey by sitting at the edge of the forest, you won't be very successful because you'll see the monkey only for a few seconds. After that, you'll just jump off into another tree and it'll disappear. If you want to really study its behavior, you have to catch the monkey, tie it to a branch or to a post, and then sit down and look at how it behaves. Then at least you have some chance of seeing how the monkey is very, very frivolous. Can never stay still. They're scratching here and scratching there, looking here and looking there, and walking here and walking there, all over the place, just exactly like our minds. So in order to understand or to investigate and observe the behavior of our minds, in order to understand cause and effect, we have to tie it to an anchor. We have to anchor it. And to use the analogy of the monkey being tethered to a branch, the monkey is like the mind. The tether or the rope, whatever, that you tie the monkey to the post is mindfulness. And what is the anchor? The anchor is the body, the 5 senses, particularly the body door. Which means to say, in practical terms, you have to try to come back to the present moment throughout the day whenever you remember to. And the snack is remembering to. Right? Come back to the present moment, be aware of your 5 senses, particularly your body door. And then check to ask yourself, is the mind in the present moment or is it somewhere else? If it's not aware of what's happening to the 5 senses, particularly the body door, then what do you think it's doing? Lost in thought, lost in conceptions, imaginations, fantasies, and frivolous comments. We have a lot of this mental chatter that's going on in our minds the whole day. Now, why do I say come back to the 5 senses, particularly the body door? Well, because seeing and hearing are not so simple for you to be in the present moment. The moment you see something, automatically the mind recognizes it and it will trigger off a whole string of concepts. Oh, that's a beautiful lady, that's a handsome boy, that's a nice-looking car, I haven't seen it before, and so forth. You see, automatically all these thoughts are already triggered off. Whereas the body is more neutral. You can be aware of what you're doing. You're walking, stretching your arms, you're driving, you're cooking, you're in the toilet. Whatever you're doing, you can be aware of your bodily actions. Of course, I'm not limiting your mindfulness to the bodily actions. You could actually bring it to the 5 senses and just see where the mind is going. Is it with the body, or is it with the eye, or with the ear, or with the nose, or with the tongue? Particularly when you are eating. When you're eating, all your 6 senses are being stimulated. When you meditate, you just close your eyes and you sit in a room. If there are no perfumes or any foul odors, you just have sound and your body sensations and your mind, right? But when you're eating, you see the food, you smell the food, you taste the food, you hear the food as you chew. And then you also feel the food, the texture of the food, whether it's crunchy or it's mushy or whatever. And there are also thoughts going on in your mind. Does the food remind you of something? You like it, you want more of it. Before you swallow, you're already thinking of the next bite. So to be mindful when you're eating means just to be aware. Ask yourself, what is the mind doing? What is it aware of? Is it aware of tasting, of the sound, of the crunchiness? or the mushiness, the texture, the taste, or is it thinking of something else? By doing that, you can observe the behavior of the mind. One of the first things that the practitioner discovers through personal, direct experience is that the mind is crazy. And this person may feel a bit of a regret. Before I started meditation, I was okay. Now it looks like I'm crazy. But actually you were crazy right from the beginning, you just didn't notice it. So noticing that your mind is crazy and uncontrollable is actually a beginning insight, a peep into anatta, no self. There's no one there. The mind just keeps on moving from one object to another due to causes and conditions. That's what is cause and effect here and now. Initially, you may not be able to see the cause and effect. You can only notice that the mind is really very unruly, difficult to control. It's running all over the place. But why? You can't see. Well, with persistent effort, if you just try to bring back the mind to whatever you're doing, and believe me, you have lots of time for that. Don't wait until you get 1 week off to go for intensive retreat, please. There's very good excuse, Cannot meditate lah, no time lah. But you got a lot of time. Let me just propose to you to make a very simple discrimination. At any time, ask yourself, in which mode is your mind? Is it on idle mode or is it on productive mode? What is productive mode? Productive mode is when you have to think about your job, certain tasks that you have to do in the office, or you have to think about certain chores that you have to perform for the family, or about certain relationships that you have to settle. Yeah? So these are productive thinking. The mind is on productive mode. What is idle mode? Idle mode is when there's all this idle chatter and commentary going on in your mind. When does this happen? Most of the time. And so when this happens and you are able to identify and recognize that it's an idle mode, then you can make use of all that rubbish as organic fertilizer for the tree of wisdom. Recycle all those idle chatter that's going on in your mind. Look at that idle chatter. Where do they come from? Do they really belong to you? For example, you're going out for the lunch, you come out of the office, and you walk down the stairs, and then you notice somebody, and then suddenly it reminds you of somebody that you knew 10 years ago. And immediately it triggers off a thought, a memory of the good times that you had with this person. And then suddenly you think, oh, perhaps I should give him or her a call to see how he or she is getting along. That is also an idle thought. You're in idle mode because that's not something really very productive. But if you're able to make use of that as grist for the mill, as organic fertilizer, you'll be able to see anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. How? Because the thought just arose by itself, right? You do not think of that person. The thought just arose because of a cause. And what's the cause? Because as you're walking down the stairs, your eye came into contact with someone. That reminded you of someone that you met 10 years ago and you haven't seen for 10 years. All right? And that memory also triggered off some intentions of wanting to contact that person. Okay? So now you can see actually cause and effect, can't you? Right here now, because your eye comes into contact with something, there's a cause. That's the immediate cause. Then secondly, because your mind recognized that person and reminded you of someone that you met 10 years ago or haven't seen for 10 years. The historical cause is that you had met this someone 10 years ago and haven't seen him or her for 10 years, right? If that had not happened, would this thought have arisen? No. All right? And it also depends on what sort of relationship or what sort of memory you have of this person. If it's a pleasant memory, then you will feel nice about it. If it's an unpleasant memory, this guy had cheated you 10 years ago and you still haven't forgiven him, then you'll feel very agitated and unpleasant, upset. So you can see there's immediate cause and effect. You can also see historical cause and effect. And you can see it's impermanent because it comes and goes. Then after that, your friend talks to you, hey, let's go over to the coffee shop for lunch instead. Then your mind is distracted and you forget all about it, right? And now you'll be talking about what you're going to have for lunch. So you can see how the mind changes. This is impermanence. And it is not self because you did not purposely think that thought. That thought came about because of causes and conditions, because of immediate cause, because of historical causes. And this happens to you the whole day, whenever you're on idle mode. Right or not? Yeah. A lot of this idle chatter and commentary keeps on going at the back of our mind. Up in the head. Every time you see something or hear something or smell something, automatically will trigger off a comment, a thought, an idea. So when you are very vigilant, being very heedful, remembering to always come back to the present moment, to check and see where your mind is, then you will be able to distinguish idle mode from productive mode. So when it's an idle mode, stop thinking. It's not worth thinking. Don't pursue the thought. And then come back to what you're doing in the present moment. This has also many benefits. The reason why we are so forgetful is because we are not in the present moment. Because your mind is thinking of something, and then, for example, you come out of your office and then you are not quite sure whether you locked the door or not, whether you faxed the letter that you're supposed to do or not, because your mind was on something else. So if you're in the present moment, being aware of what you're doing from moment to moment, the chances of forgetfulness is very, very much reduced. So to recap, first we need to understand the nature of the mind, which is it must always have an object. It can take objects of the past, present, future, as well as imaginations, fantasies. But if you want to keep track of the mind, you must give it a reference point, an anchor, which is the present moment. Present moment means any of the five senses, particularly the body door. So there's an anchor, there's a reference point where you can, every now and then, remembering to ask, where is the mind? What is it doing? If it's not in the present moment, not aware of the five senses, particularly the body, then what is it doing? And then if you know that it's doing something other than what you're doing in the present moment, then you can distinguish, is it idle mode or is it productive mode? If it's idle mode, stop thinking, look at it, try to look at the cause, and then leave it, come back to the present moment. If it's productive mode, of course, go ahead and think, because you need to think to survive in this world. So when you do that again and again, as often as you can, as continuously as you can, in as many aspects of your life as possible, then you develop the perception of impermanence. You develop the perception of unsatisfactoriness. You develop the perception of not self. This perception is developed through direct experience, through verification, not by learning from a textbook and trying to pass an examination. No, this is happening from moment to moment. If you're able to do that as often as possible in as many aspects of your life as possible, then I can assure you that this will lead to a very powerful, impactful transformation on your mindset. Because you see impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self in all activities, in most of the things that your mind is occupied with, that leads to less lobha, dosa, moha. Less clinging, less attachments, less desires, less aversion, less disappointment, less frustration, less delusion. Because delusion, according to the Buddhist sense, is not understanding these things according to their true nature. And their true nature is that the mind or our thoughts are impermanent and they are conditioned. Let me give you a further example of how keeping track of how our mind works and how our thoughts are formed can actually give you composure and a very objective sense of equanimity. For most of us, we often identify with our thoughts. Give you a classic example. Say you have a bad experience, you're not in a good mood because something went wrong somewhere, and then you got angry at your elderly parents, and then you start to scold them. Then immediately after that, you start to regret how can I be such an ungrateful son or daughter? My parents brought me up and gave me so much comfort, and then now I scold them just because of that little thing that they did. So, first of all, when you scolded your parents, that was out of Aggacitta, unwholesome. It was an unwholesome thing to do that. It's out of anger, of impatience. Then you identify with that thought, thinking that that thought is yours or that action is yours. And you regret, I shouldn't have done that. How can I be so ungrateful? Yeah? So you're having double suffering. The first suffering is when you scold your parents, and the second suffering is when you regret and dwell in that regret about having scolded your parents. This is because we identify with our thoughts, our emotions, thinking that they belong to us or you are your thoughts. And another thing is that most of the times people believe everything that their thoughts say. If you're able to keep track of your mind, you will see that thoughts come and go, like I said, because of causes and conditions, immediate causes. You saw something, you heard something, then that triggered off a thought. Yeah? Then with practice, you can see even deeper. You can see how the thoughts are formed, the structure of the thoughts. What are they based on? Our thoughts are based on assumptions, based on beliefs, based on expectations. Now, if your expectations are unrealistic, if your assumptions are inaccurate, and your belief is wrong, and then you continue to believe what your thought is saying, you'll be getting into trouble, right? And that's what happens. Give you one classic example. Someone sent me an email some time ago. It's about this English couple. It's an extract from their diary. First, you get a diary of the English woman. And in her diary, she wrote, I'm so devastated today. Don't know what's wrong with my husband. This whole morning, he wouldn't even pay attention to me. He was so glum and so depressed. And when I tried to talk to him and asked him if I was the cause of any of his problems, and he said, no, it's got nothing to do with you. And yet he ignored me the whole day. Could there be another woman in his life? What is it she has that I don't have? I must really have a heart-to-heart talk with him tonight. When the husband came back, he was so exhausted, he sat in front of the TV and fell asleep. So she couldn't talk to him, and she was crying the whole night in bed. And then look at the page in the husband's diary. God damn it. How could England have lost that match? Don't just laugh at them. Look at your own life. How many times has that happened to you? Because you believe your own thoughts. Yeah, don't simply believe every thought that arises in your mind. The husband already told her, it's not because of you, but she didn't want to believe the husband. She preferred to believe her own assumptions, her own suspicions. And that's causing all the suffering. Okay? So, as you keep track of what's happening to your mind, you begin to understand more and more of how thoughts are formed. And then you are not so attached to it anymore. Then you won't be so attached as to say, this is my belief, my religion, my teacher, my center, my opinion, my view. Because if you identify with all these things, the moment somebody challenges those things, it's like challenging you, right? But if you do not have any identification with them, with those views and opinions, you could just say, this is an opinion, right? This is a view. Let's sit down and discuss it. Right? Because you don't identify with it, and if somebody else gives a better opinion or challenges the assumptions upon which that suggestion was made, then you could be more objective and say, yeah, that's correct. Let's modify the assumption and make it more accurate. And then you can come up with something more effective, more optimal. And all because you did not identify with it as yours. You look at yourself, a lot of times when we get involved in arguments, it's because of this clinging to ourselves, isn't it? Sometimes we know that we are wrong, but because of the ego, we do not want to admit it. That is very, very common to all of us. So if you practice watching your mind, keeping track of your mind, seeing how thoughts come about because of immediate causes, and eventually you will also see historical causes, then your understanding of anatta, of not self, becomes more and more profound. Then there will have a very significant transformation in your life. You'll become someone who is more patient, more forgiving, more understanding. And although you could say that this gives you a sense of impersonality, there's no one there, but in a way, it also brings you closer to other people. In a way, by seeing not self, there is also a oneness involved. Why? Because you begin to see that everyone is the same. They also have such thoughts. And their thoughts also arise because of causes and conditions. And they are not meditators, they don't see, but because you are practicing, you can see, you can understand. It's easier for you to forgive and understand people. So, to recap, if you keep on tracking your mind by anchoring it to the five senses, particularly your body, being able to distinguish between idle mode and productive mode, making use of the organic matter in the idle mode for your organic farm, then you'll be able to understand the nature of your mind, the nature of your thoughts. Then you will not be so attached. You practice more and more detachment. You understand impermanence, suffering, and not self more and more profoundly. Perhaps I should explain a little bit more on suffering. People say that they can see anicca, they can see thoughts coming and going. But why is it suffering? They may be able to see anatta in the sense that thoughts come and go without their involvement due to causes and effects. Why is it suffering? It is suffering basically because you don't have any control. You might have some nice feelings that have arisen, and you want to maintain them and let them stay longer so that you can enjoy. If conditions are not there, they will go, right? If there's some pain, physical pain for example, that has arisen in your body, and you don't want it, you want it to go away as soon as possible, will it go away? It won't. When the conditions are not right, it will just stay there. When the conditions are right, it will go. So it's all due to causes and conditions. There's no one there. To think that there is someone there who is in control is suffering. And the very fact that they come and go without your inviting them or without them listening to your command is also suffering in the deeper sense of the word. So when you can see this continuously and as often as you can, then it will surely improve the quality of your life. For the quality of our lives depends so much on how you react to what's happening at the six senses. And how you react, as I said, is a result of past conditioning and present circumstances. Then you might say, then who is that who is trying so hard? Who is trying so hard to enrich his or her life? Well, there's no one there. It's just conditions, conditioning, conditions. And I'm conditioning you now. I'm programming your mind. And hopefully, with your mind being programmed, it will continue to program other moments of your mind. So I hope that being Buddhist, you will not just rest content with believing in the moral law of cause and effect. Or even nowadays, we have a new religion of science. People who just believe in so-called scientific findings without questioning their authenticity. So whether you are a Buddhist or a science religionist, don't rest content with what you believe in, but track your mind, try to understand the true nature of your mind. Try to do this in a very experiential way throughout the day, as often as you can. Don't wait until you get 2 weeks off in 52 weeks to do your intensive retreat. You can start doing it right now. And hopefully that will improve your quality of life. Shall we open the floor for any questions? Anyone here?
Comes to our mind, and say moments later or a few hours later,
question is what I think of thoughts, how do thoughts arise, and whether to what extent thoughts can influence actual occurrences in the future, whether good thoughts or bad thoughts. And if bad thoughts arise, how do we immediately curtail them? Nowadays, scientists have acknowledged the fact that everything is connected to everything else. Whatever thoughts that you have, or I have, will actually influence the environment in ways that we may not even perceive. Some years ago, there was an experiment conducted in New York. They took a survey of the crime rate in New York during a certain period of time. There was a control period. And then at another period, they managed to get a group of meditators to practice meditation of loving kindness. And then after that, they compared the two results. And they found that when loving kindness meditation was being practiced by that group of meditators, the crime rate dropped significantly. Of course, you've heard of many stories of how loving kindness can actually influence things to happen in a good way. So the power of thought should not be underestimated. It is very powerful. And it really depends also on how powerful the owner of the thought is. If you are a very powerful person, your thought can influence the environment. If you are not a powerful person, other people's thoughts and energy can influence you. So we influence others and are influenced by others depending on how powerful we are and how weak we are. There's an exponential relation in this energy pattern. People who are very highly developed spiritually, their influence is not arithmetical, it's logarithmical. That means to the power of 10,000 or something. A highly developed person can influence 10,000 people, but a person who is very, very low in spiritual development can hardly influence himself, not to say others. Or he will be the subject of other people's influence. When bad thoughts arise in us, there's one factor in the Noble Eightfold Path called right effort. Right effort means preventing unwholesome thoughts from arising, unwholesome mental states. And if unwholesome mental states do arise, then we must try to abandon them. The third aspect of right effort is to arouse wholesome states of mind that have not yet arisen, and once they have arisen, to maintain and develop them to fulfillment. This is right effort. Okay, but how do you get the right effort? Although the Noble Eightfold Path is usually listed as though it's linear in progression, it is not linear in progression, it's interactive. In order to know whether you have good thoughts or bad thoughts, wholesome mental states or unwholesome mental states, you need to have mindfulness. Right? Mindfulness is remembering, looking back, checking to see what sort of thoughts you're having. But then mindfulness is also a conditioned phenomena that is based on a certain value system. How would you be able to distinguish what is good and evil, what is wholesome or unwholesome, if you have not studied the Dhamma? Right? So that also comes under right view. So they are all interactive, they interact with one another. Right mindfulness has also got to be supported by right view. And with right view, then right mindfulness can look back at an object and a thought that has just occurred, and right mindfulness can then distinguish, oh, this is a wholesome thought, this is an unwholesome thought. Then right effort comes in and says, okay, unwholesome thought, go away. How you do that, like I said earlier, is if you understand the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is that you must always have an object. You must always think of something. If your mind automatically goes to that mode of being unduly worried about something which you cannot settle, because your mind is very disturbed, you cannot settle or address a particular problem that you have. But the mind automatically goes there. It's a habit of the mind. You always want to dwell in negative thinking. Then you must try to change the object of the mind. Don't let the mind dwell on something which you cannot handle. No point. Change the object. How? Come back to the present moment. Be aware of what you are doing at the moment. 5 senses, particularly your body sense. That's how you break the spell, That's how you can get out of depression. If you don't do that, You get caught up in these depressive thoughts, these negative thoughts, and it keeps you turning around and around and around, and you can never get out of it. Yeah, it's a vicious circle. That's what depression is all about. Not being able to get out of it because you are drawn like a vortex into the negativity. But I always like to say it's like riding on a sampan. You ride on a sampan to cross the sea or to cross a river. Then due to some rough currents, suddenly the sampan capsizes. And then you want to start to learn how to swim. Can or not? No, you must learn how to swim first before you step into the sampan. Right? Now you better start to practice mindfulness right now. So when the sampan capsizes, you know how to swim. So don't wait until the next retreat. Do it right now.
The mind need an object to have a mind. If no object, then there's no mind. So what is mind actually?
The question is, I said that mind must have an object. If there's no object, there's no mind, because mind and object are interdependent. So what is mind actually? That's what I've been trying to say, Mind is that phenomena that is able to know, to think, to conceive. It doesn't have form. I use the word think and conceive especially for the mind, because the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body consciousness, they can only know, can only be aware of a specific object, but they cannot think, they cannot conceive.
So I think previously you keep on mentioning about observing the mind. That means it's trying to observe what you are knowing, what you are observing, what you are perceiving.
Because I keep on saying, keep track of your mind, observe your mind, and then you're asking me how to observe the mind. It's true. Actually, it's not so easy to observe the mind. What we are observing are just thoughts. Thoughts are products of the mind. They are not the mind yet. So when you talk about mind, you might go deeper into just bare consciousness. Bare consciousness, being aware of things. Now, this can only be accessed with deep levels of concentration, when there are no more verbal thinking in your mind. But I'm talking about daily mindfulness. In daily life, there are a lot of thoughts. You cannot get rid of the thoughts. You're thinking all the time. But you can make use of those thoughts, even to see anicca, dukkha, anatta. The thoughts are also conditioned phenomena. They come about because of causes and conditions. They are built on certain causes and conditions as well. Past conditioning trigger off a certain way of thinking. So that is a way of understanding conditionality in a conceptual way. Even that conceptual way of looking or understanding conditionality is experiential. And it need not necessarily be rational. It may sound rational to you because I'm using a lot of words to explain it, but it will come intuitively. Like I said just now, when you try to locate the immediate cause for a particular thought, at first you see only the immediate cause. Later on, with practice, the moment you see the immediate cause, the historical cause also comes together with it at the same time, without your having to deliberately reason out, why do I think in such a specific way? No, it will just come by itself.
At least you just see the thing happening.
Yeah, it will just arise, pop up in your mind. Now, if you watch your mind, sometimes ideas just pop up in your mind. You need to solve a problem. Somehow, the solution just arises in you. But how did it arise? You don't know. Sometimes it's due to a lot of causes and conditions which we are not aware of. Lots of our thoughts, particularly thoughts that are not triggered off by sensory perception, are also like things that pop up in the blue. Thought just arises, without being stimulated by any of your five senses, right? It happens very often. So that is also another indication of anatta. Although you can't see the cause, you also know that you are not responsible for the thought. The thought just popped up. Sometimes you can see the cause, sometimes you cannot. But in any case, it is still anatta in the sense that there's no one controlling the thought. It just arose by itself. To recap, first, in our daily life, it's not so easy to watch the mind. What you're watching are products of the mind, thoughts, ideas. But these thoughts and ideas also exhibit the three signs of existence. They also come and go because of causes and conditions. And they are not self, they are unsatisfactory, and they are impermanent.
I know what is your comment on law of attraction? We hear so much about in the reading, you think of something, you get the law of attraction. So how is this versus karma? That means if it's something that does work, then if I have bad karmas, but I still say, hey, I want good things to happen to me or something good, then how is it compared to karma then?
She's asking about the law of attraction. How can the law of attraction be reconciled with the law of karma? Actually, they're the same thing. What is karma? Karma is action. What sort of action? Mental, verbal, physical action. If you are thinking of something that you want very much, you're actually creating the karma of wanting something. Of course, it doesn't work for everyone. The cases that have been reported so far are of those who are successful. Those who are not successful, they don't say. Yeah, you don't know what is the success rate like. Okay? Yeah? Yeah, you don't need to say it. Yeah? Last night I was giving a talk on a formula for worldly and spiritual success. One of the ingredients of success is to have passionate enthusiasm, a very strong desire to want to succeed in what you want to do. You see? So that is also an ingredient for success. You need to have passionate enthusiasm in what you want to do. That's number one. Second one is to have perseverance. And the third one, to be single-minded. And the final one is to have intelligence by investigating to see the best way of being successful. I don't think there's any contradiction between the law of attraction and law of karma. It's just that too much attention has been given to the law of attraction. It doesn't work for everybody, and I think that a lot of other contributory factors are also involved. The law of karma is very complex. Like I said, it's not something that we can verify ourselves. We can only trust what the Buddha and the scriptures tell us.